I think ideally, when people talk about interdisciplinarity, they would like it to be where you're bringing your perspective as a geographer to the epidemiologist and learning from each other. But I think a lot of times when interdisciplinarity gets banded around, it sort of becomes meaningless, or, it becomes something that's fashionable rather than something that anyone really understands what they're talking about. So bringing this a little bit closer to home, how do you think a program like the School for Public and International Affairs can practice interdisciplinarity if that's even part of our mission? And what would you propose as ways to either encourage that or even define it?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that something like a school is an institution. It has a history, it has personnel. It's not something that it's not something that could ever spring from the head of a director or whatever. So what you're doing is you're working with colleagues, you're working with students, and the school was created in order to focus the university's attention upon matters of international and public affairs. They're looked at in lots of places, but this was to be one focus for that attention, and that means focusing that attention within the university and focusing that attention outside the university. The school's got to look both ways. It's got to contribute to national debates, and it's got to raise debates on campus. Now, in terms of interdisciplinarity, as I say, I think disciplines are a very good way of training people. You can't train people in everything at the same time. They have to have some sort of focus. So I think at undergraduate level, disciplines are absolutely necessary. The idea of having an undergraduate degree that says it's about everything, well, it'll be about nothing. I'm very happy that people should enter conversations from disciplinary backgrounds. But I get very tired when they enter conversations from positions of disciplinary privilege. I work on literature, so I'm often at conferences discussing James Joyce, and I get a little irritated when someone will say, speaking as a literary scholar, or I go to conferences on Irish nationalism, and I get historians say, speaking as a historian, as if there's anything different about what they do when they go to the archives and what I do when I go to the archives. And when I send work for publication in history journals or in literary journals, I recently published a paper on James Joyce in a literary journal called New Formations. It's not read as the work of any particular discipline. It's read by people who know nothing about me. It's refereed and they accept it or they don't accept it. So I don't like disciplinary privilege in that sense, but I think disciplinary perspectives can enrich conversations, because people just think of slightly different things because they've been trained to identify those dimensions of an issue. So a geographer is trained to think about space, place, and environment. That doesn't mean that we don't think about things like conflict and status and so on, or what I call sometimes the triple tops. I was used to teach a class on history of medicine in Madison, and it had sociologists in it. And the sociologists, every time anybody made a comment, if someone's made a remark about, I don't know, class-specific mortality patterns, the sociologists would say, it's very interesting, but have you considered race and gender? They've talked about race. They say, it's very interesting, have you considered gender or class? And I sort of triple top, so I just told the students to just be aware that they would always be asked for whatever the trio they hadn't mentioned, a sociologist was going to ask them to comment upon. So these differences of emphases, these differences of perspective can be fruitful as long as they don't become claims to privilege. So if we look at something like SPIA, that's the School of Public and International Affairs, and its attempt to focus attention upon matters of public and international affairs for the university, the people that are inside, that are faculty in SPIA and the students in SPIA come from a diversity of backgrounds. They come from geography, they come from economics, they come from political science, they come from public administration, they come from urban planning, they come from environmental studies, and so on and so on and so on. And they end up talking about matters of common interest. They talk about matters like security. And when they're talking about security, that they are talking about something that other people in the room will have a slightly different perspective on. And that produces a conversation which can enrich everybody's research. So if somebody's talking about security, as I was yesterday with some students up in Northern Virginia at the National Capital Region, Alexandria campus, about security, they were coming from a military background. You know, they were talking about the United States can only be secure if it has more guns and more everything than anyone else. And it's all about how big your stick is. And what's left unexamined there is why other people wish you ill. Why do other people wish you ill? Can you address that in any other way? Is there a diplomatic strategy to make sure that fewer people think, so you don't have to think of everybody as your enemy? Then you don't need such a big stick. But also, what produces that ill will? Maybe other people think of security in terms of their security of life. Maybe they're worried about the effect of international trade on the chances they have of feeding their children. So there are insecurities of health. AIDS is probably the major biological event in the history of the human species for the last 5,000 years. And it produces ramifications of insecurity across certain places. There are more school teachers dying in some countries than are being trained. What does that do to social reproduction of society? And what does that do to the introduction of young people into adult roles? There are more orphans in some countries than there are parents. What does that do? So we start thinking about security in lots of ways beyond the militaries, and we start thinking about environmental security. What does it mean to have social resilience against environmental change? What does it mean for people in New Orleans to realize that they weren't secure? They thought they lived in a rich, well-organized country, and they found that they actually lived at the forgotten end of a river that people had ceased to bother managing, and that living under an environmental catastrophe that some people could profit from very well, thank you very much, as long as they didn't come back. Go away, enjoy yourself in Houston. Now, so one can think of a topic like security that people within SPEAR have a very wide range of perspectives upon. Now, do those perspectives add up to anything, or are they completely separate? Well, is the military perspective enriched by thinking about the relationship between civil disorder and social security, or between environmental stability and migration patterns? I think it is. I don't think any of these perspectives leave such a common conversation without being enriched. So SPEAR can provide a focus for those sorts of conversations. Call them interdisciplinary if you want, but they are conversations about things that people come to with different perspectives. So you want to call those perspectives disciplinary, I don't mind, but you can call them lots of other things. So that's my take on interdisciplinarity.